in order for law enforcement to stay focused on doing the right thing, we've got to find out what our public expects of us. And if that changes, we've got to be willing to change with it.
Could you take us back to when it first occurred to you that reaching out to the community in a new way and maybe a more sophisticated, evidence-based way would be something that made sense for your agency?
Yeah, so I do recall we had been involved in several conversations with a wide variety of people within our community, whether it be an activist group or whether it be attorneys or whether it be a civic group. There was always this idea of we believe that our community needs this, or we believe what you should be doing is this. And I think I told you when I called you on the telephone one afternoon, I remember that conversation as well, that I was being asked by so many different people, so many different groups, to change the ways that we were approaching the job that seemed to be quite simple to me in different ways. And I remember I turned into my driveway, I'd called you, and I think you called me back just as I was pulling in my driveway. And you went back to this whole idea of the Palin principles, which, you know, that was something that I'd heard about when I first entered law enforcement and rarely circled back to. You told me, you know, Sheriff, look, you can presuppose what your community wants. You've just got to figure out a way to find out what they want. And the best way to do that is to ask them. And after leaving that conversation, going home, went back to my staff, and we in a conference conversation said, you know, I said, why don't we reach out to a polling agency and do a poll and ask them what they want? And it started out as sort of something everybody snickered about, and then I was pretty insistent that we needed to follow up on this. And my chief deputy, who's just, he'll do anything that I want to do, but he's always going to push back a bit, came to me and said, if you really want to do this, we'll make it happen. So we did some exploration with the company, reached out to them, and they were quite intrigued because they had never been asked to do such a thing. And they said, give us a little while and let us figure out how we could model this. They had a couple of subsequent meetings with my lawyer, who Jennifer Galassi is my in-house counsel and police advisor. We had several meetings with the command staff, and we focused in on those things that are important to us, and they came up with a whole bunch of questions we'd never thought about, ran the poll, and everybody was quite astonished with what the results came back with. And some of the things we knew that we thought our community cared about, they didn't care about. Some of the things that we thought that they wouldn't be interested in were the things that they cared about the most. And it gets back to something that Mac Brown told a football team one time, is that the football game is coaching, and the business of football is really simple, but it's done with complicated people, and that can be frustrating. So that's kind of where we landed, and so that's where it all came about. And I'd like to say that, you know, this was 100% my idea, but it wasn't. You know, you in the conversation in the driveway is where this all started.
Well, I'll say, Sheriff, I've been very fortunate over 10 years to get a chance to travel to almost every single state in this country, urban environments, rural environments, suburban, and what I've come to appreciate is the diversity of opinion when it comes to what is and is not a high priority. And I guess I've just gotten to a point where I know we've got folks on different sides. You talk about that difficult balance and folks that are sort of hollering at each other from a distance. And then I sit back and say, well, you know, we can't have, in my humble opinion, one model for how to police the community, when we've got a nation the size of our nation, and when we have honest disagreements. And I don't say that just to be pleasant, but I genuinely believe that if we look at those Peelian principles that we're both mentioning here and hearkening back to, we've got to respect the fact that there's on the West Coast versus the East Coast, and even within the state of North Carolina. You're going to have different areas where some things are considered to be more of a problem than others, and we're all working within many of the same laws, but it's about that discretion that we see that is consistent, that starts with leadership directives and filters all the way down. And I wonder if you could speak to Orange County, just a bit about what's unique about Orange County, about what Orange County is like in terms of the folks that make up that community, and how you think the Orange County, getting the pulse of Orange County residents, is a distinct undertaking, as opposed to trying to say, well, this is what Americans want, or this is what all people want, because it seems to me that there is no one size fits all, and we should be looking to what you did in analyzing what your residents, what your voters, your communities in Orange County were looking at.
I'll say the one thing about Orange County that strikes me the most is they're very outspoken. The folks that live there are outspoken about what they believe ought to be happening, and they do engage in dialogue, and they will force you to engage in dialogue about right and wrong and their beliefs versus your beliefs. And I think that that's very important, because without that conversation, compromise can occur. And I think good things have happened in our community because of the diverse population that lives there. Now, I will tell you that as I've traveled across North Carolina and talked to a lot of the other sheriffs across the state, when I start talking to them about things that we're doing in our county, sometimes they look at me like I got three heads, because they're saying, why? For instance, the poll. I can remember sitting in Raleigh at a meeting with our executive board and proudly telling them about my idea, and they all said, why in the world would you want to do that? And I said, what do you mean? They said, why would you want to ask them what they want? And I said, that's my job, is to take care of them. And I went back to what you and I had spoken about, and why wouldn't I want to know what they're thinking? Why wouldn't I want to know what's important to them? And I that day began to question my good judgment. But when this came back, and overwhelmingly, you called and commented on the approval rating that the community gave me as a sheriff was off the charts. Tom Jensen said this is unheard of. It's really speaks loudly that we did the right thing. And I've had a number of those sheriffs that are in the room want to know how I did it and how to get in touch with the people that did it. So I'd like to think that by not thinking necessarily outside the box, but forgetting about the box, and just trying to get at the answers to the questions that were burning us up, and that is, what do my people want of me? I am the sheriff of the county. They have picked me to look after their protection, their safety, their well-being. And the overwhelming goal that I have is to give the residents of Orange County a safe place to live, work, raise their family, and age in place with dignity and respect. And I believe that the only way to do that is by listening to what's important to them, to be able to give that to them. Now, what works in Orange County won't work in Hoke County. It won't work in Cumberland County. And that's fine. They have a sheriff there. That is the unique thing about the way that this sheriff's model is set up in North Carolina and other states that have sheriffs. They represent the people that they have been picked to represent. What works in one place may not work in the other. It shouldn't. The people are different. They have different ideals. They have different needs and different desires. And I tell you, I've been to a lot of other counties, and I'm not going to throw rocks at any of them because I like things about those counties. But I love where I live in Orange County, and there are a lot of sheriffs that I have a great deal of respect for across the state that couldn't be the sheriff in 5 minutes in Orange County. It just wouldn't work because their way of thinking is different, and that's okay. But again, that's where the diversity is, I believe, the most important thing about our county.
Since you've gathered the data that you've gathered, could you give us a sense of, for folks that are maybe on the fence, sheriffs, or maybe even what I think is really an interesting thought is mayors and city council members and city managers that feel like, well, we can't win for losing because we've got a diverse population of different individuals that feel that different things are priorities, and we've got some loud voices and we've got folks yelling. How do we move from just a city council room or a county commission room where folks are yelling and move to a more calm, sober approach at, now, what do most folks think are a priority? Since you've gotten that data, could you give us a sense of how that's helped you do your job and helped you stay focused on your day-to-day operations?
You know, I think that in order for law enforcement to stay focused on doing the right thing, we've got to find out what our public expects of us. And if that changes, we've got to be willing to change with it. Good example, marijuana enforcement. What do you tell a young 22-year-old officer who makes a vehicle stop, and as soon as the window rolls down, they're overwhelmed by marijuana smoke? What they have, through their training and experience, been able to identify is cannabis or an illegal substance. What do you tell that officer? How do you keep them focused on understanding that, well, it's okay to have less than 1.5 ounces? Well, no, it's not, according to the law. Policy says that it is. So you've got to be able to have that shift in what's right and what's wrong. And one of the things that I've said over and over before, the law building over in Raleigh, it says law and justice. It doesn't say law, and it doesn't just say justice. It says law and justice. So you can enforce the law and you can make just decisions at the same time, but you've got to have that roadmap of how to get there. And without that, and if you just depend on the law book that you open up and don't put a little bit of human thought into it, you can lose your way. So, and I'm not beating up city governments. I'm just saying that you know, when a city police department gets to the point that they have to throw their hands up and give the decision-making process to somebody else who's not a subject matter expert, then quite possibly the mission has been lost.
I think if we're not careful, we can have decisions made by law enforcement leaders based on a relatively small group of people that's very motivated and very loud, and no one's even checking IDs to see if they live in the county or they live in the city. You know, it's not as if, you know, those could be folks from out of town that have their own beliefs, and I'm not saying that they aren't genuinely held, but we can see a real disconnect where you have folks that live in a city that feel that they don't have a voice because we're only going on, well, if you're angry and you're willing to wait your turn at the city council meeting, or you're willing to engage and make some noise downtown, then okay, I guess that must be the will of the people. But the reality is, as you've shown, I think, through your polling and through your mindset, is that it's a lot more complex than that, and really trying to find out what the community priorities are, from the folks that are going to bed early to the folks that are maybe more active.
You're absolutely right. Those 12 loud voices that find their way to every county commissioner meeting are not necessarily, you got to listen to them, but you don't need to let them drive every decision you make. When you talk about the defunding movement, and that in conjunction with COVID and the 24-hour news cycle that we face, and the news media's narrative, national narrative, that all police are bad, and everything that was once thought to be good is now bad, and all the things that were bad are now thought to be good. What do you expect from those people that come and put that badge on every day? What do you expect them to do? You can become disillusioned very, very quickly. And, you know, I've always made the point that I want the best and the brightest wearing that. Somebody's going to wear the badge. I want it to be the best and the brightest.
And I think it's fair to say that there's plenty of cities whose police departments we've seen very tragically, particularly as you know, as a student of the history of your profession and someone that's been an active member of your profession for so long. It's the folks that are already in communities of suffering that tend to suffer even more when we have failures like the types that we're seeing in so many city police departments across the country. And I don't think it's unfair to suggest that one of the culprits there is is a lack of understanding. Well, as a law enforcement officer, what do you want me to do in this particular city? Because we've been left because of city councils that'll say in the summer of 2020, well, we're going to reimagine, we're going to defund. And you and I both know so many of those cities that a year later it was, we're going to reimagine, and we're hiring and we're refunding and we're saying get back out there and get after it. And that just creates so much confusion. And the devil is in the details is what I think of as an important phrase, and why polling what your community wants with specificity. Right? You all didn't just go out and you didn't sit down with your advisors and say, let's conduct a poll that says, do you want us to be more aggressive or less aggressive? Right? That's a very blunt instrument. Instead, it was, okay, marijuana possession, noise complaints, loitering, expired tags, some of these sort of frequent flyer incidents and concerns that you see in Orange County, to really drill down. Because if we speak, again, I'm just in hashtags and just in slogans of, well, we got to be more aggressive and go out there and get them, versus no, we're over policing. Those are two broad statements that don't really get us close to an articulable directive for the men and women that work for an agency like the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
I'm very proud of the way our association works together. I'm very proud to be part of an executive board that is so diverse and is made up of so many different ideas. And I'm glad they thought it was a silly idea when I decided to do this. I will say that Eddie Caldwell, our executive counsel and executive vice president, rather, he has driven home in all of us to the point that we can almost quote it, our mission statement. And I think it's important for any business that has a mission statement, not just to put it on the wall, but to live that mission statement. And the way to do that, and I've said this before, if you want to know as a leader, if you want your people to know what's important to you, you got to tell them. You got to tell your people every day what's important to you, so much so that if a stranger walked in the building and asked that deputy or that employee, what's the most important thing that your boss wants every day? What's the most important thing about this agency to your sheriff? They ought to be able to tell you that without thinking about it.
When I look at all of the discourse around law enforcement and the idea of reforming the police and making law enforcement better, I just think it's a real shame that this hasn't been a big part of that conversation, because so much is going past folks, and there's a lot of passion without a lot of understanding in that give and take. And I think what you're doing in Orange County is a great place for a lot of agencies to start. And when was the last time we really asked, and in an evidence-based way, what it was that our citizens want from their law enforcement agency? It's so fundamental, it's so basic, but it seems to be something that in far too many places is just being leaped over for the next topic.
If you're just going to do this one time and look at it and laugh about it and put it up, or beat your chest saying, well, they really like what we're doing, I think the mission is lost. We have a plan to do this over and over a number of years to make sure that we stay on track, because as we've said before, times change, people change, generational changes occur, and the needs and wants of our communities are certain to change as well. So we've got to be able to grow with it.